Hi, and welcome to the For Everyday Leaders podcast. Brandon Faust, Alex Holt here with you today. Alex, why don't you tell our listeners what this podcast is all about?
Yeah, this podcast is all about leading in the everyday spaces and moments of life. And today on the show with us, we have Cassie Mecklenburg with us. Cassie has her doctorate of education in ethical leadership. She is the executive director of Sheltering Wings in Danville, Indiana. Sheltering Wings extends the love and compassion of Christ to people in circumstances of domestic abuse. She's married, and her husband live here in the Indianapolis area.
And Cassie, we just want to say welcome. Thank you for coming on. And this, I feel like I was telling you before, like this introduction, I feel like is like 2 years overdue. We've had some mutual friends who've been like, oh, Cassie and what's happening at Sheltering Wings, which we've had some volunteer opportunities at Sheltering Wings, donations. We've, referred people to Sheltering Wings over the years as well. And so it's fun to be sitting with you. And I'm excited personally to hear more of your journey and story. And welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So let's get it started. I can't wait to kind of hear the whole mosaic of this, but how, when you were a young person, kind of those high school years, heading into college, what were some of those kind of formidable times as a kid? What was life like for you growing up, and kind of what set you on that trajectory to study what you ended up studying?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a youth pastor when I was first born, and then at a pretty early age for me, he transitioned into music ministry. And so because of that, the way that it works in our church, we moved around about every 4 to 6 years, but always in the Midwest. So I've been from this area, Indiana, Michigan, later Illinois, but graduated here locally and really grew up in a great home. 2 parents that were wonderful role models. My sister, who's 4 years older than me, she and I fought like cats and dogs growing up. And my mom would point to other sisters who were older, and she would say, "Look at them. You could be like them." But we didn't want to have anything to do with one another.
Yeah.
And now she's my best friend. So now we're the
awesome.
people that other moms can point to.
Right.
And look, they like each other.
Right.
But in the midst of all of that, had a really good upbringing. Nothing that I would really look back to in my child life as major, pivotal turning points or anything for me. I went to Olivet Nazarene University, which is where my grandmother went, my parents went, aunts and uncles, cousins, my sister. So we bleed purple and gold. So it's just been.
I feel like Nazarene folk in the Midwest, like when you hear a story like that, there are multiple stories that you don't necessarily hear. Like I went to Indiana Wesleyan, I don't hear as much of the generational stuff, but Olivet especially, which is really cool. I think it speaks to how amazing that community must be in that school and everything. That's really cool.
Absolutely. Loved my experience there. And just had faculty and staff that poured into me that
awesome.
At a time that I would say was a really formative time in my life, right? I mean, you're making a lot of decisions about what's next and possibly even who you're marrying or dating relationships, that kind of thing. And just really appreciated the adults that came alongside me at that time and spoke truth into my life.
That's awesome.
And so that kind of set me up. I don't know. I was one of those students that I think I went through 4 or 5 different majors. I don't know if I officially declared that many. But didn't really have a great idea of what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to go into events and planning events and looked into that. And as I started going down that path, I just realized I really enjoy my weekends and evenings more than wanting to give that up every single weekend and evening. And so kind of went on a different trajectory and went into communications, still with that events in the back of my mind, trying to figure out what that would look like. I was one of those students, though, that didn't have that clear picture of what life would look like. When I was in high school, I felt a call into missions in some capacity, but I also knew that I was not going to be the missionary that was serving in Papua New Guinea or one of those other third world countries, which my mind couldn't quite grasp.
Yes. What does that look like?
What do you mean to be a missionary, but not in a third world country or otherwise? And so I really wrestled with that of, okay, Lord, I thought you called me into missions, but I don't feel called into that. So what could it look like differently? And so I think that was part of my wrestling throughout a lot of college.
So what did you end up getting your undergrad in?
Corporate communications.
Okay. So it wasn't communications.
Yeah, it was.
Very cool.
Great.
You know, it's interesting as we interview folks on this podcast. A lot of times that's the narrative, you know, bounced around 2 or 3 times. You'll occasionally, I feel like 1 out of every 8 or 9, you have that one person that was like, when I was 13, I set my mind to this. And I'm like, okay. But I think that's more of the common story, you know, and I think of bouncing around. I mean, even to this day, stats back in 2019 were something to the effect of only 17% of kids who go to college end up working a day in their life in the career that they got a major in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which is
I've heard
just
something along those
insane,
lines.
right? And so it's like kind of, especially men, like our brains don't develop till we're like 26, right? So you're like asking an 18, 19, 20-year-old to make these huge commitments of what are you going to do the rest of your life? I mean, it's a gamble of a lifetime to just roll the dice and spend a couple $100,000 potentially on a degree that you're not sure if you want to be in. But also, you know, to your point as well, the investment, relationships, faculty, new friendships, all of that, a part of that college experience can be so beautiful, informative. But kind of what after that, after those kind of college years, you have this degree. What was the next step? Was it more schooling? Was it working? A little bit of both? What did that kind of lead you onto a path to?
Yeah, I didn't want to have anything else to do with school. While I loved my undergraduate experience, I was really there more for the social aspect. I was also really involved in student government.
Cool. Okay.
And so that's what I poured my time and attention to. My girlfriends give me a hard time because there's this great picture of us on graduation day, and they all have these gold cords for honors, and then there's me. And so, but I'm like, but I had a really great time when I was in college.
Right.
And so coming out of all of that, to be frank, I had a pretty easy time up to that point getting the job that I wanted. I ran for class president 3 years and was elected that 3 years in a row. And I feel like I put the hard work into it, but it just seemed like things worked out for me.
Yeah.
And then I graduated and went several months looking for jobs, trying to figure out where the right fit was for me, and just was really struggling and trying to figure out what that looked like. And someone then gave me the recommendation, don't apply just for jobs that are available. Look for the type of organization that you want to work at.
Yeah, that's good.
And just start blindly applying to those. And that's what I did. And it was the best piece of advice for me, not only because I landed a job with Riley Children's Foundation that I ended up loving, but it changed my mindset of what I was looking for. I was no longer just looking for a job, but I was looking for a mission. I was looking for a culture. I was looking for something that was a place that I felt like I could contribute and that would invest in me as a young professional.
Yeah, that's so good. Do you feel like as you look back at that, because I think that's something that a lot of young people don't know how to do, haven't processed that. Do you feel like there was someone that like maybe instilled that thought in you? Like, was there a professor as you look back at that?
Yeah, there was a professor there by the name of Jay Martinson, and he's one of those guys that was everybody's favorite. But he was the head of the communications department, so I had an opportunity to interact with him quite a bit.
Yeah.
And he was one of those people that he didn't mince words with me. Like, he held me accountable, and he could speak truth to me, but he was also super encouraging. And so he was just one of those people along the way. He helped me decide what my major should be, even though he didn't maybe technically do career counseling, but I remember him sitting down with me on multiple occasions as I just said, it's second semester of my sophomore year and I don't have any idea.
Yeah.
And he took the time.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, let's talk about what your interests are. Let's talk about what you're passionate about, where your giftings are. And so he was one of those people that I just really attribute helping to set me on solid footing. And then even after graduating, I remember following up with him and reflecting, telling him, I've reflected on this conversation or that conversation. Thank you so much for talking to me about that. It helped me as I was figuring out what was next.
Yeah, that's good.
How did you then end up at Sheltering Wings? You're the executive director there. So what was that kind of process look like? And, as you look back, a degree in communications, executive director, doing amazing work at a great nonprofit that's helping a lot of people in a very significant way. How did that kind of transition happen?
Sure. So I'm going to really try to give you a condensed version of it. I met in college a guy that I ended up marrying, and we were married for 5 years. And then that marriage fell apart. It was something that completely blindsided me. It wasn't what I wanted to happen, but that's how things went. And it was a time when I was really broken, and I was searching for what was next. And similarly with what we were just talking about, I thought I was on this trajectory. I had these hopes and plans and ideas of what my life was going to look like. And I came from this home that seemed generally, picture perfect and healthy and all of those kinds of things. And then here I was, now divorced at the age of 29, and just thinking, what in the world has happened, and where am I going? What's next? And I was really starting to get burnout on fundraising and praying about what was next. So I thought, man, I want to go back into higher education. That was a time when people had poured into me. So I want to pour into young people also at that formative time. And so spent a solid 2 years looking for jobs. I was offered some positions that ultimately I knew weren't the right position for me, and the ones that I thought were the right position for me, I wasn't offered those jobs. And so just felt like I was floundering because I had just gone through this major life change and trying to do good, but it just not working out. And a former youth pastor of mine connected me with a church downtown and said, I really think you should go on one of these vision trips. With the stage that you are in your life and what you're looking for, I think you should do that. And so I looked into it, and I ended up going to Cambodia in 2013. And was there with a mission, the Center for Global Impact, that works with women involved in human trafficking. And while I was there, I was still super frustrated about where things were going. And while I was there, praying about what was next, and frankly arguing with God, because I was telling him, hey, I'm trying to give back. I'm trying to serve you. I'm trying to do what I think is right. And this is not working out. And just felt like I continued to be led back into nonprofit. And I was like, no, you're done with me in nonprofit.
I told you, I'm done with this fundraising stuff.
Burned out on fundraising. But at the end of the week, just really recognized that when you argue with God and you win, you still lose. And so at the end, I said, okay, if this is what I'm supposed to do, then here we go. So I came back from that experience, which was just in so many ways, not only because of my career trajectory, but also just personally, the things I learned, the things that I saw. It was really a life-changing moment for me. So I came back, and this job, the executive director at Sheltering Wings, had been introduced to me a couple of months prior to that, and somebody encouraged me to apply. And I was like, no, I'm done with a nonprofit. That's okay. But I came back and inquired to see if the position happened to still be available. And it was. And so the short part of it is, after 5 months of interviews, landed the job here at the shelter.
That's wild.
So much.
So two big things that I just hope can be an encouragement, and just to kind of refresh for our listeners, as it has been to me, is that in those seasons of where you make a declaration to God, like, hey, I'm trying here. Like, I'm trying to honor you, but like, come on, like, don't invite me back into the space that I said I didn't want to go into. And isn't it just like him, to use that redemptive thread as part of your story, and how it's impacted so many other people? I think the other thing too in all of that is, I think a lot of times the pressure at a young age, like you said, to find that right career, to find that right thing. And so many times, we do this in our life mapping framework, where people are like, you know what, I don't really care what the title is, or even the skills that I use. Sometimes there are seasons of our career where they're like that, but like, get me around the right culture, the right people, the right mission, and like I'm in, and so even just that, there are those times in our lives, and times where you get blindsided, like you shared as well on things in your life, where you're like, okay, I'm regrouping, I'm doing all the right things, I've got the right inputs, but man, this is freaking hard. And this trajectory of life that just, you wake up one day and you're like, how did I get here? I didn't sign up for this. I didn't ask for this.
Yeah.
And to know that, I think through Cassie's story, and I think so many people can relate to this in different ways, like you may wake up one day and be like, how the heck did we get here? But to know that like you're not forgotten, that the purpose has not left your life, and all of those things, even those times that feel like it maybe has. I love just hearing that story, and especially the redemptive thread of not only for your career, but on the blessing that I know it's been to Hendricks County, all the things that have been happening, the families that have been countlessly impacted, which is really cool. Yeah.
And I think another thing I want to highlight in your story is this idea of you've let the right people at the right time speak into your life and say, hey, I think you should go on this vision trip. Hey, that professor, I think this is something you should pursue. I think you should apply for jobs based on culture and not open roles. Like you've got this, I just hear this thread of openness to letting people speak in your life. And I think that can be a real challenge for leaders, everyday leaders in every space that we talk about, of like letting someone speak in and challenge you, push you, especially in those times where we wake up and we're like, how did I end up here? This is not how I saw my life going. This is not what I saw as the preferred future, and not closing off that willingness to let people invest in you, to speak into you, and to challenge you. I think that's something that's really inspiring to me about your story.
Yeah, I'm never the smartest person in the room, so I will take all of the input there. And honestly, I mean, the reality of it is I'm gifted for certain things. Other people are gifted for other things. I in my own accord am never going to be able to do all things all the time. And so I value that collaboration and teamwork and listening. That space where we can just say, let's come together, let's talk about it, let's flesh it out and figure out how to help move forward, whether it's a challenge that I'm having or someone else is having, but just that space to listen, I think, is so critical.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as we keep the conversation going, what is, when you think about like an everyday leadership principle, something that we can give to the folks that listen to our podcast, what's an everyday leadership principle that maybe has come up in your life that you now apply on a regular basis as you lead in the spaces that you get to lead in?
I feel like answering it with just the word integrity feels a little bit cliche, but I think it's so important that we are the same person behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, regardless of where we're at. But I've just been learning a lot about the gifting of consistency. And I wouldn't have necessarily highlighted consistency all that long ago because it kind of sounds boring. And I am somebody that I always appreciate the challenge. I like to try new things, and I'm okay with taking appropriate risks and all of that. But there's a blessing in consistency, and I think of consistency in tandem with integrity. And so just letting people see that your yes is yes, and that you're somebody that can be relied on. And when you say you're going to work towards something, you're going to do that. And when you make those commitments, that you follow through.
Yeah, that's so huge. I resonate with that a ton. I've been learning that and leading my team of just like, I may not feel the best as a leader every day, but when I show up for them and I'm very vulnerable with them of like, hey, I'm not at my best today, but I want to be here and walk alongside you and do this. The change in our team dynamic of us consistently showing up for each other has completely changed the way that our team functions. And so I would agree. It doesn't sound like this glamorous, big, like, just be consistent. But I think that's what people are after and are looking for in the people that lead them.
And I think that's also what fosters change. A lot of people get really impatient because they want to change something and then they make a decision and it hasn't yet become a habit. And so we sometimes just have to persevere and be consistent, stay at that decision, help make those changes. I think that's why trust is eroding for so many organizations is because they're not consistent and following through. And so when people talk about, you hear all of these leadership talks about building trust in the organization and you as a leader, just fostering that culture. And it is about the consistency. I can't just make one trustworthy decision today and then think, oh, forever.
Right. I filled up that trust bank and
Well, and it's like in any relationship. And so it doesn't matter if you're leading an organization, in your home, in your neighborhood, like it doesn't matter. Like when you show up consistently with integrity, and do what you say what you do, like all those things. And there's that consistency that builds so much trust. It builds credibility, where it doesn't matter if it's in your marriage, with your kids, with people you're serving in the community, with your staff team. Maybe you're a new entry level kind of staff member. Same principle applies, right? And these trustworthy we want to build a trustworthy culture. Be a trustworthy person, and that's where we start. If we all do that, right? And look for that. And so love that. And I want to get into a little bit of now what has that transition looked like in the work. Tell us a little bit about Sheltering Wings. Tell us why you were so drawn to, you had that great advice that someone had given you years before about like a great mission, a trustworthy organization, good culture, all that stuff. Why did you say, you know what? Because it's no small task to raise your hand and say, I'm willing to be an executive director of a nonprofit that's doing great work and all that comes with that. What kind of drew you to that? What continues to get you motivated to stay in that work? Because it's not a easy space, or a comfortable space, I'm sure, at times to be in.
Yeah. I think the strength of our community hinges on the strength of our families. And so being able to speak into that through the lens of the intervention and prevention of domestic abuse, it's a real privilege for me to be able to be in that space. I shared a little bit about my upbringing and having a great home life, and what breaks my heart day after day is that my story should not be the exception. It should not be something that that a person might look to and potentially elevate. It should just be the norm. It should be behind every home that you pass by. And it doesn't have to look just like my upbringing. I'm not saying that we want the Truman Show type neighborhood and mentality, but the safety, security, and love that I felt and the respect should be what every person experienced. And until that happens, our work has to continue. And so I feel really, really passionate about that. And so I love coming alongside of families, and I'm on the administrative side. So to be clear, I'm kind of one step removed of it. I have a team of people that do the direct service side, and they are my heroes. I mean, they're in the trenches every day. But coming alongside my team and coming alongside the families that we serve, their perseverance, their grit, their courage and bravery to get out of these situations. I mean, it's a complete change for so many of them in their life. And one of the most dangerous times for a person who's being abused is when they leave. And so it takes a lot for a person to get to that point. And so we want to be that safety net for them. We want to be that safe place that they can go, whether or not they need safe housing or they need support and someone to come alongside of them with protective orders or support groups, or just to talk through things. I mean, sometimes for families or an individual to say, is this abuse? I know that what I'm experiencing, I don't like it. It's maybe unhealthy, probably, but is it abuse? And just navigating that, because for so many individuals, it's normalized, especially if that's what they've grown up in.
Wow.
And so it's been a privilege for me to live in that space and to be able to come alongside the families, and every story is so different, and it breaks my heart. And I remember when I first started at the shelter, hearing a few stories from some of the women and just realizing, oh, this isn't a movie that you're talking. This isn't a horror show that you're referring to, but this is actually your life. And hearing about the capabilities in a negative sense of what people are capable of and the way that they treat other humans is heart-wrenching. But then the stories of hope and a change and the newfound freedom, the newfound security, all of those things that people can find is just what encourages me every day, because on average, a person returns to their abuser 7 times before they finally leave. And that doesn't necessarily mean coming to a place like sheltering wings or that type of thing, but it's just different forms of trying to escape. And I just always think, I don't know if this interaction with you is your first time, your 5th time, your 7th time, your 12th time, but maybe this can be your time. And so we're going to treat this like your last time, that it is the opportunity for you to start anew, to understand your worth and your value, and to surround yourself with the love and respect that you're worthy of. Like, this is your time. So let's go after it.
Cassie, is so inspiring to hear about the work that you're doing. I love when we get to interview people and hear their passion for their work come through in the conversation. That's amazing to hear all that. Thank you for sharing that. As we wrap up our conversation today, what is a book, a podcast that you've been listening to, reading lately that you could share with our audience?
I am reading a book called I finished reading a book called Developing Female Leaders by Katie Cole. And it's really kind of spoken into this journey that I've been on the last couple of years. When I started at the shelter, I did different interviews and things just to kind of help the community get to know me. And there were a lot of times where people would ask the question, well, what's it like being a female executive director? And every time they asked that question, I just winced a little bit, because I fought against that adjective, female executive director, because it felt, even though they might not have intended it that way, it felt like they were trying to put it in a category that was maybe lesser than a male executive director. And I just always wanted to say, it's the same as a male executive director. However, what I've been learning is that until we elevate and celebrate women in leadership, we're never going to normalize it and never going to be able to take that qualifier off of it. And so over the years, I've embraced it more. And so I still want to make sure that I'm talking a lot about equality and equity in the workplace for women and advocating for that. But I've become more comfortable with talking about female leadership because I want to talk about it from the mountaintops. I want to celebrate that because I think that there's so much value in having men and women working alongside one another, and women leading in certain capacities. And so I've been reading that book, and it's been really good.
That's awesome.
I think it's such an important thing because for the first time, in church world and nonprofit world where my career has been, it is often like very male dominant leadership title positions. And I had a really great and thoughtful boss. And it was the first time that I had been led in the workplace, quote unquote, by a woman. And it was great. I developed so much under that time, and I think that those moments and watching her navigate things really started helping me see some of the uniqueness of that and how she was such a great advocate for people in leadership, but specifically creating paths for women in leadership, and just the disparity that often can be even in spaces that feel good, like nonprofits and churches. Like there's an issue here, right? And so I think it's such a beautiful thing. And I would encourage, I also read that book, and I would encourage men to go read books like that to create some kind of understanding and empathy and awareness about some things. And as well as a great reminder for us to be advocates, right, for others, especially in the workplace, but in life in general. And I think sometimes, I would like to think before that time that I was pretty aware of some of those challenges. But the truth is that we have no clue sometimes. And so creating context and opportunities to listen and to learn, that's something I want to continue to be doing. But sometimes it's as simple as taking a step to say, hey, let's read this book. Let's have this conversation. Let's be thoughtful about these kinds of things. And so, anyways, I think it's so great. And I think championing that, encouraging, advocating that, embracing that, I appreciate your vulnerability in that, because I'm sure that question, like you said, can come out and come across a certain way. So I love just hearing you speak about that. It's great. Well, we want to I feel like we could talk to you for another hour, but we're going to wrap up, kind of put a bow on this conversation. But tell us, how can we get connected to you and to the work at Sheltering Wings. What are ways that people could get involved with that? Could you create a little context for us on that?
Yeah, so there are opportunities, whether it's in person or virtually, that people can be a part of our work. And if you go to shelteringwings.org, that's the easiest place. So it has all of the opportunities for volunteering and that kind of thing. But I kind of boil it down to 3 primary calls to action, if you will. The first is to give. And I'm going to say, whether it's Sheltering Wings or another mission that's meaningful to you, when you can give of the resources that you've been entrusted to, just generous, radical generosity is another platform and soapbox that I could talk for an hour about. But but at the shelter, we rely on philanthropic donations. And so if that's a mission space that's important to you, then I would welcome those gifts. And they can do that online. The other is gather. And for a lot of nonprofits, we are able to keep our budget as low as we are because of people going out and purchasing items on our wish list, things like toilet paper, paper towels, ethnic hair care products, individually packaged snacks, those kinds of things. It's a really easy way when someone's at the grocery store to just pick up something extra and then they can send it to us or go onto Amazon and ship it to us. And then the last part is learn. And I always want to make sure to talk about that because we know that we're not always the first place that a lot of people are going to go to when they're experiencing abuse. It's oftentimes a pastor, a friend, a family member, or even a colleague. And so we have a training series that people can go through, and we can do it in person or we can do it virtually because we want to partner with you in this. We want to help equip you. The instances of abuse in the workplace and even in churches it's no different regardless of where you go. It's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men. Those statistics are incredibly too high. But when you think about how that can affect people in your workplace or fellow parishioners, it's just incredibly crippling and isolating when they're experiencing that. And so our training programs can help come alongside of individuals and of corporations, organizations, just to feel like they know how to have that conversation, what are the questions to ask, what are the signs to look for. So we want to make sure that we're a resource. So it's give, gather, and learn.
Awesome.
Love that.
And we will link to all of that in the show notes. And we just want to say thanks to Cassie for jumping in, telling us some of your story, telling us about the great work of Sheltering Wings. We want to say thank you to our listeners for listening to the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast. We hope it helps you lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life.
Yeah, and you can continue to join us, hear conversations like this on the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. Cassie, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to join us. We have loved this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you. It's been fun.